many of us, scholars who have been trained in mostly European schools of thought, I remember even from graduate school, when I was reading Weber or reading Durkheim or reading Marx, wondering, because from very early on I was exposed to sociology of knowledge, that knowledge is produced in a specific sociological context, historical context. How is it applicable to me? How is it applicable to us? If I were to apply or extend or think through these ideas in Iran or in the Arab world, in Islamic world, or in Mexico, in Latin America, in Africa, in India, in what way would they be or not be the correct epistemic frame of references? So throughout my academic career, every book, every article that I have written, I've always had this rather creative dialectic, thinking about wonderful, enabling, fascinating ideas that from Plato to Derrida, that I have always read with care and with admiration. And the fact that I'm not American, I'm not European. I have tried to listen to what Gramsci says in Prison Notebook and be conscious of my own inventory of who I am. The result has always been very creative, very provocative, very path-breaking, because my concerns that I have are from my own people, with Iranians, with Arabs, with Muslims, with, by extension, people in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, people who have been historically subject of the colonial conquest of Western Europe and now imperial context of U.S. imperialism. So this book, you may say, the origin of it is actually when the Green Movement began in Iran back in 2008, that there were conflicting thoughts, that some said, oh, this is a revolution, it's going to topple the regime. Some said, oh, this is a plot by Americans who want to regime, etc. But to me, none of those sounded true. None of them appeared to be legitimate. So I began to experiment with an alternative way of thinking about this, which was, let me look at it as a civil rights movement, not as a revolution. And that enabled me to have an encounter with the question of civil liberties and civil rights movement in the US, but then critically rethink them in Iranian context, Iranian history. Then I did the same when the Arab revolutions happened, and I was writing my book on the Arab revolutions. That again, I thought the questions of total revolution, and everybody is going to win, and the state is going to fall, and hammer and sickle is going to go up, it was not going to be applicable. This was not that kind of a revolution. So I began to experiment with the idea of open-ended revolution rather than total revolution. And I began to introduce idea of Bakhtin as in a novel. The revolution is unfolding like a novel rather than a Homeric epic. Gamal Abdel Nasser or Mossadegh will come and Gandhi will come and lead the revolution. So this book, as I say, Can Non-European Think, is, in the introduction I indicate that this in fact is a third in a trilogy, because I carry those two books theoretically forward in decidedly epistemic grounds rather than political grounds, but is predicated on those two books that were provoked by political events. And the book, as a result, gave me an opportunity. Initially, this was in a dialogue with an essay somebody had written on European public intellectuals, and the question of public intellectuals was appropriated entirely for a European context. So I used it as a hook to ask, why is it that when we, not just in terms of epistemics, in music, why is it that if Mozart sneezes, and as I always say, I'm sure he sneezed very beautifully and melodically, it's music, but the most sophisticated musical systems in India, is called ethno-musical. What happens to a music when you call it ethno-music or ethnomusicology, the discipline, or ethnophilosophy? Why is it that critical thinkers in Africa or Latin America, they're ethnophilosophy? What is this ethnicization? What is it in the thinking of Enrique Dussel that is not just philosophy? Or Walter Mignolo is just philosophy? Why is it ethnophilosophy? So this again gave me an occasion for me to talk about the epistemic barriers that exist, that you fall into certain gridlock, that thinking is made possible, but paradoxically also impossible by virtue of certain epistemic limitations that these modes of knowledge production entail. Now here, I was also very much influenced by what was happening in post-structuralism, postmodernism, which are entirely European phenomena, have nothing to do with us, when the promises and premises of modernity are challenged in the rise of postmodernity, or the very metaphysical foregrounding of thinking in Aristotelian, Platonic, Socratic thinking is challenged in post-structuralism and deconstruction. So certain things were happening in the European context, which to me, I was following it like watching a great football match between Italy and Germany. And yes, I was rooting for Italy. Habitually I do. I don't like German football. But again, both of them were alien to me. To follow with the football metaphor, I've always been I like Latin American football. It's more operatic, is more theatrical, is more ballet-like, and etc. So again, if I were to continue with football metaphor, I always thought that we understand the Latin American football, style of football and manner by assimilating into German football. That is, how is it that the Germans play? Now, Brazil or Argentina or Mexico plays different than them. My intention was to theorize from facts on the ground. I wanted to theorize civil rights movement in Iran from facts on the ground. I wanted to theorize Arab revolutions from facts on the ground. I wanted to take the slogan of the Arab Revolution, Egyptian Revolution, الشعب يريد إسقاط النظام, people demand overthrow of the regime. This regime, to me, was not just political regime or state apparatus or political culture. To me, that regime was also a challenge to critical thinkers from the post-colonial world of a new mode of thinking, which required for us to be critically intimate with the idiomaticity of these events as were happening, and not quickly assimilating them backward into what the purpose of political science or anthropology or sociology or area studies ordinarily understand. So that this was the condition, the condition of change in the Arab and Muslim world, the condition of change, in fact, in Europe itself, with the rise of the indignato from Greek revolts and reaction and demonstration against austerity measures, all the way to student uprisings in UK or labor unrest in Argentina, in Spain, that this moment was not a moment that we could understand it with sort of received knowledge. And in the book, Can Non-Europeans Think?, I pay great homage to Alain Badiou, because Alain Badiou was one of the first who actually wrote a brilliant book on, I'm a great admirer of that book. And Alain Badiou is a great French philosopher. So as you see, there's no animosity or hostility towards European philosophers. I'm using Europe the way Fanon used it, as an invention of the third world, that then the dialectic and binary of Islam and the West and the West and the rest, with the West and the East, keep corroborating. And as I say in the book, in fact, my ambition is to bring Europe into the bosom of our critical thinking. And as I have always said, the worst kind of Eurocentricity is actually Europhobia. That you don't touch European thoughts, otherwise you get polluted. So yeah, I don't have that attitude. It is, as you see, the very vocabulary, the very conceptual categories, training, upbringing, education, teaching, is very much in the European and North American context. But by the same reason, and by partaking in critical possibilities that thinking allows, I collect my critical apparatus and plant it in Iran, planted in the Arab world, planted in Mexico, planted in Africa, and think about these issues, but from a different perspective, and take those perspectives seriously.